funny because around the house my wife will often sing, Peter Grimes, Peter Grimes, Peter Grimes, Peter Grimes, Peter Grimes. Because of course in this opera, that's all you pretty much hear. For most of the opera, you hear the name Peter Grimes. And because one of the really interesting things about that is the name has exactly the same rhythm as Peter Pears, who was not only the creator of the original role, although actually originally Britain intended it to be a baritone. Actually Pears was selected rather later. But of course they had a gay, to all intents and purposes, a kind of a gay marriage at a time in England where that was not legal. And interestingly enough, they actually left the United States of America, the big cities in the United States of America to go and live in the English countryside on the East Coast, which is of course Aldborough, the little town there. It looks like Alderborough, but it's one of those typical English words where it's just Aldborough. And it's a fishing village. Britain grew up about 50 odd miles north of there in a town called Lowestoft, that was famous for its herring fishing industry. The whole town actually thrived on fishing. So this was very much a part of Britain's background. But also, while Britain was here in America, he actually experienced the first production of Porgy and Bess. And as most of you know, I think the opera company here did that a few years ago. There's a scene in a bar with a storm, and it's almost when you get that storm scene in Grimes, it's almost obvious that that may well have been the original moment of conception, if you like. Although the official story is they read an article by E.M. Forster, the English novelist, and the man who would ultimately be the librettist of Billy Budd, on Peter Grimes. It wasn't Peter Grimes itself, it was an article about Peter Grimes. So the opera was officially inspired not by a literary source, but by an article about a literary source, which I guess that must be kind of unique, I would think, in the history of opera. So one of the famous quotations, and you know, when you're around Britain's scholarship for a number of years, these almost become like scripture of a kind, I suppose. One of the most famous statements that Britain made about Grimes is he said, "I wanted to express my awareness of the perpetual struggle of men and women whose livelihood depends on the sea. Difficult though it is to treat such a universal subject in theatrical form." There are several really interesting things about that quotation, but the one that jumps out at me is universal, because of course it's not universal. I doubt any of us in this room here have ever made our livelihood fishing or living by the sea to fish, okay? So, you know, maybe it was a Freudian slip, but here's something that's very, very interesting. One of the great influences on Britain in his early years was a poet by the name of W.H. Auden, Wystan Auden. And Auden had a great, from many angles, in effect enabled Britain to pass from infancy or his youth into a sort of a maturity, not least intellectually. And Auden went on to write a book after Grimes came out, actually, a book called The Enchafed Flood, which is about the romantic iconography of the sea in the 19th century. Now this is very, very interesting for many reasons. One of them, which of course is my interest, is comparative religion. Comparative, if you look at a lot of the world religions, and indeed to some extent science, for example, the idea that there's so much gravity in the cosmos that it's actually flowing off the edge of the universe. It's going somewhere. Where, we don't know, but it's actually flowing off the edge. Flowing, I think, is the interesting thing there. And if you look at a lot of these comparative religions, and I'm going to make, this is kind of a little bit crude just to get the basic idea across, but there is this idea of the cosmos being, as it were, a cosmic ocean. In other words, there's an ocean that we cannot see that is all around us. And inside this cosmic ocean are beings. The ones that particularly interest us tonight probably are the Leviathan and the Behemoth. Actually, in popular culture, this has actually occurred. Even a film that just came out called Gods of Egypt has a being that is just this big mouth with teeth that's coming through the universe to devour everything in its way. Well, these are ideas that go all the way back in history. And this touches on the two ideas, the two concepts that I really want to deal with tonight with you guys, is the sea and salvation. The connection between this idea of the ocean and the sea and the idea of salvation. So the sea is basically not a benevolent thing. The sea, no matter how calm it looks, how sparkly it looks, there are always dreadful creatures lurking underneath. How many of you remember Jaws? From 1975, right? I mean, nobody wanted to go in the ocean after seeing that film. And interestingly enough, that film has a theme based on a half step, a very famous half step. And I always tell my students, isn't it funny, I'll go to the piano and I'll play da-dum, which is a whole step, da-dum, da-dum. I say to them, how scary is that? It's not scary at all. Gums would be the title of that film. Okay? There's no teeth. There's no teeth in the whole tone. So I tell my students that in technical terms, if you look on the piano, the distance between a half step and a whole step, from a certain perspective, is the widest possible distance. Because all the intervals that we hear in music are basically related by semitone or whole tone. Those are the basic units that make up the whole of music. And if you put a whole step and a half step together, you get what's called a minor third. And a minor third, if you think of a whole step as being, using the Jaws thing as a reference point, if you think of the half step as being sin, anxiety, fear, panic, yearning for release, the whole step is kind of redemptive, it's open. Okay, just as I showed you there with the Jaws, comparing the half step and the whole step, the gums and the Jaws, if you like, okay? Let's face it, we would rather be in Gums than Jaws. Am I right? As a movie, okay? And there are times in Peter Grimes where you're going to hear musical worlds portrayed before your ears, where you're going to think, I wouldn't mind being in that world, but I definitely don't want to be in that one. And this is really precisely because of the way Britain uses the chromatic system, these half steps, these slippery, sliding intervals, as a symbol of something that is really undesirable, sin, corruption, so on and so forth, and the whole step and all those related intervals that are much more desirable and much more open, okay? So there are some themes. I've got two pieces of paper here I'm going to have to juggle between. I've got so much material here, I'm afraid I'm not all going to get it in these 45 minutes. So I promise I will try to play music, but I'm being very jealous tonight about going through some of this material. If you want to refer to your handout just for a moment, this might be a good point just to introduce the idea of some of the different themes. Britain, of course, was a big fan of Verdi. Anybody that writes opera is going to be. Giuseppe Verdi, the Italian composer. And one of Giuseppe Verdi's great gifts was that he could bury themes very, very deeply inside the orchestra, so that to all intents and purposes, the intellectual or sophisticated musical developments did not become a problem on the surface. You could simply enjoy his music just for the sheer sound, without needing to get caught up necessarily in the development of themes and ideas. And this is one of the things that Britain exploits, actually, in Peter Grimes. It's really interesting. The things I'm about to explain to you, you don't really need to know. You don't need to specifically listen out for them, but you can. And in a way, it's kind of helpful. So there are a couple of things, if you look at the handout really quickly, the two main things that we're going to consider tonight that I think are pretty good geographical landmarks for this opera is what I call the Peter theme and the Ellen theme. Now, the Peter theme is exposed exactly halfway through the opera. This is actually a three-act opera, but to all intents and purposes, it's an opera that's in two halves. The first half deals with the problem of salvation, how to find it, and the second half deals with the outcome of the catastrophe of rejecting salvation. And the exact midway point is at the end of the big church scene, Act 2, Scene 2, where at the end of this off-stage church service, which is very much of a 19th century operatic thing, an off-stage church service that's kind of commenting on the action that's going on the stage, Peter actually slaps or beats or punches Ellen, knocks her to the ground, rejects her effectively, and sings on B flat, so be it, and God have mercy upon me. It's an octave that contains a diminished triad, B flat, G, E. Okay, which is the tritone, the devil's interval. Going back to the medieval period, the tritone was the devil's interval. If you wrote a mass with a tritone, then you had to correct it with flats or sharps to make it either a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth, because the devil lies right in between perfection, right in the middle of it, right between the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. So we actually have the devil's interval, da-da-dee-da, with that little chromatic turn from E to F, that little chromatic shift of the half step. And it's interesting because E, which is related to Ellen, because E, in terms of keys, is sharp. E major has 4 sharps in it. And in Britain's music, the sharper you go, the closer to heaven you get. So C natural means you're in neutral, okay? And then the more keys that you add the sharps, the more radiant, the more shiny, the more sun-like you become. On the other hand, the flatter you go, the more towards hell, the downward. You flatten. So the more flat you get, you go in the other direction. So in effect, a little bit technical, don't worry if you don't get all this, but the cycle of fifths, which if you play fifths on the keyboard, right away from the top of the keyboard, just come down the piano in fifths, it includes all 12 chromatic notes of the chromatic scale. So you've got a ladder or a framework to heaven and to hell, okay? And Britain kind of exploits this. So E, da-da-dee, that E is associated with Ellen, and Britain would have enjoyed that pun incidentally, E, Ellen, and then F minor is Peter. And both of their keys are a half step apart. They're the distance of jaws. This is a relationship that's going to be fraught with tension and conflict, okay? Because this is one of the spiritual issues in the opera itself. Now, interestingly enough, that theme, which is that climactic, catastrophic point, if you want to think of it in those terms, is anticipated in certain ways. For example, in the very first interlude, now how many of you know the music of Peter Grimes fairly well? I'm not putting you on the spot here. Not many. Okay, so I have to play you some music. You're not helping me here, guys. I have to play you some music. Okay. Well, in the at the end of the, let's do this. At the end of the Love Duet, we have Peter and Ellen, and they're singing together. And basically, Peter sings the truth, the pity, and the truth to a minor third. The truth, the pity, and the truth, and the minor third becomes then the whole language of the opera with, again, that salvation whole tone and that hell half tone combined together. Almost like original sin, if you want to think of it in those terms, okay? He sings the pity, the truth, the pity, and the truth, because they've just had this prologue where the second boy he's had has died, and the borough are kind of freaked out by it. So they have this kind of little court, it's not meant to be a court trial, it's meant to be an inquest, but in effect they turn it into a court trial. And gossip is one of the very, very important things in the whole opera. The theme of gossip and how gossip can be destructive is very, very closely related to this idea of the sea. So Peter sings the truth, the pity, and the truth. And Ellen Orford, the schoolmistress, who represents Christ, she has an unconditional love and an unconditional value towards everybody in the borough, especially Peter. So she sings, Peter, come away. Just the two of them on stage. And then Peter sings, where the walls themselves gossip of inquest. And Ellen says, but we'll gossip too and talk and rest. And Peter says, while peeping Toms nod as you go, you'll share the name of outlaw too. And Ellen sings, Peter, we shall restore your name, warmed by the new esteem that you will find. Peter responds, until the borough hate poisons your mind. Ellen, there'll be new shoals to catch, life will be kind. And then Peter shouts, I, only of drowning ghosts, time will not forget, the dead are witness, and fate is blind. And at the same time she sings, he's singing in F minor, she's singing in E major, unclouded, the hot sun, there it is, the sun, the hot sun will spread his rays around. And then they sing, your voice out of the pain is like a hand that you can feel and know, here is a friend, here is a friend. And then this duet moves then into the opening interlude. If you take a quick look again at your handout, at the bottom here, you can see that there are 6 interludes, and I've designated them in square brackets, Ellen and Peter, Ellen and Peter, Ellen and Peter. One of my old musicology teachers, a musicologist by the name of Hans Keller, came up with the idea of the Peter interludes, which gave me the idea of then, okay, well maybe the other interludes are about Ellen. So here's the love duet between Peter and Ellen, just to give you this idea of their 2 keys. Don't forget, he's in F minor, she's in E major, they share G sharp and A flat, And then finally, importantly, he comes over from F minor into her key of E major. And that movement of him into her field, he comes to her, is very important musically. Hear the clash between their voices. And then they tangle. And then he's pulled into her E major, minor ninth. Another minor ninth. Now here's the first interlude in A. Oh, hold on a second, that's not it. This is it. La, E, F. So the strings have taken up the half step between Ellen and Peter. It's a heart like a bird. Then we get a second level clarinets with harp, a chain of thirds, and then the brass. Now that change of chord has la da dee da 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 inside it. Okay? So the embryo of what Peter is going to become is right now held in a kind of stasis. It's harmless. It's radiated by this love, okay, that Ellen is offering him. But as the opera moves forward, as we obviously see, that love becomes really threatened and in fact broken at a certain point, okay? Now, while we're on this particular interval, I'm going to jump forward to play you an Ellen theme, one of the Ellen themes. If you're looking at your handout, this is under Ellen theme number 1, Dawn, in A major, with the Leviathan brass lifted up by Ellen through her triplets. And this is what it sounds like. This is now at the end of this particular interlude I just played you. This is the end of it. And I want you to notice the triplets. I'll point them out with my hand, coming up in the brass, like a mighty whale that's coming up, breaching the water temporarily, and then crashing back down and sinking back down into the depths. Here we go. So the strings and clarinets. Now the brass. Accept this love from this woman who has unconditional love for him, surely things will come out right. Everything in the music is telling us that this is a really, really positive thing. But because this is a tragedy, so it's not going to work out. There aren't going to be any happy endings here. No Disney moments, okay? So that little X theme that was hidden, now in Act 2 there's a scene in the pub, okay? everybody's in the pub, there's a massive storm. This is the Porgy and Bess sort of moment, if you like. And while they're in there, Peter comes in, he disturbs everybody as he always does in the opera. Everyone's immediately on tenterhooks whenever he's around. And they sing a round song called Old Joe Has Gone Fishing, and You Know Has Gone Fishing, and I'll Show You Who's Gone Fishing. And he's in Davy Jones' Locket. It's a pop song, pop music, okay, which is an important thing actually in this particular opera. And the borough actually sing it to that Leviathan theme. La da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. It's again the fish theme, if you like, the Leviathan theme. Okay? And right at the climax of the round, again, Peter comes in, but he doesn't come in the same rhythm as everybody else. He comes in really slowly, he slows it down, again, like some big fish in the middle of a big sea. And in this case, importantly, it's the community that are the sea. This is a biblical idea. The roaring sea is the nations and the roaring nations. And Britain actually brings this to us in this round song. Here it is.
Old Joe has gone fishing, and young Joe has gone fishing.
7/4 time. There's little punches in your orchestra. Second voice, it's a round. Third. It's like fish swimming into a channel. Fourth. One in handfuls and handfuls. 5. 3, where one of the little dances that clarinets actually play in the barn dance scene actually becomes the hunting chorus, where the whole community go out to actually capture Peter and actually fish him in the way that we just pointed out there in the theme. So in Act 2, we've already mentioned God Have Mercy Upon Me, which is the moment where the theme is really announced by Peter. That then becomes the turning point of the whole opera. And then the big orchestral Passacaglia. Again, if you look at your handout, number 4, in terms of the C interludes, has a ground bass that goes bum, 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 bum. And it just repeats like hundreds of times. Bum, 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 bum. And then the orchestra play these different themes over the top of it that then become the material in the scene between Peter and the boy, that in some productions can be really disturbing. For example, in the 1970s, we were just talking about this earlier, John Vickers, Colin Davis, the conductor, they decided to completely ignore Britain's original production with Peter Pears, and Pears would come across like a very sophisticated school teacher. But John Vickers came across like a raw animal, and the scenes with the boy, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see actually in the production here how this is handled. because it can be quite disturbing. The violence and the threat of violence against the child is one of the most disturbing things. And I know that I've read peers said, I really had trouble doing that scene because it's so clear that something really bad is going down. Because what is bad and is going down is the boy is actually a symbol of Peter's soul. The boy who is silent throughout the entire opera is a victim, in this tug of war, this tug of love between Peter and Ellen. When he finally falls from the cliff top, he sings the only note he sings in the whole opera, which is a super C, the natural, innocent note. Do you remember we said that with the keys, C natural? Remember the first piano lesson you ever had, the C major scale? And it sings, ah, from the high C, the falling sound. And it's Peter, having rejected Ellen's love, is the symbol of Peter's soul falling, okay, in through the boy's voice. And because Britain went on to produce a lot of music for boys, Britain was actually, just to freak you out a little bit here, a passive pedophile. He never acted on it, as far as we can tell from any of the people that were ever around him. And I actually knew Britain's official biographer, a biographer by the name of Humphrey Carpenter, lived in Oxford when I was doing my PhD. And we had a couple of jars together in the local pub. and Humphrey, bless his heart, he was so thorough. He got around every boy that ever sung in anything, been to Britain's house. And he said, none of them said he was like a benevolent uncle. Now, some of them said, if we'd let him know we knew, and it was okay, it might have been a different story. But we didn't. And he never took advantage of it. The reason why I'm sharing this with you, not just to creep you out, although, right? But because ironically, as if having an openly gay relationship in the 1940s, which was illegal, wasn't bad enough, we now have this deeper level of tension. There was a problem actually with Piers. It was a problem. Certainly, for example, in The Turn of the Screw, the opera The Turn of the Screw, where the character of Miles, played by a very handsome young boy, David Hemmings, the actor, Blow Up. You know the movie Blow Up? Yeah. Antonio from him. He was the boy, and he was very sexually aware as a boy. He was actually the guy that said, if I'd let him know, we'd have been in bed in a second, but I didn't let him know. Okay? But there was a lot of tension there. It was very, very difficult. So we have to understand, although it's creepy and disturbing, this is actually a very, very important part of understanding what's actually going on in Britain's work, and the fact that he wrote so much music for boys and for children. Okay? To his credit, he never did anything about it. Okay? But the tension is there in the music itself. And in that Passacaglia, bum, 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 which is a combination of God have mercy upon me, and also one of the very few lines from the poet George Crabbe, who wrote the original poem, The Borough, a series of poems in which incidentally Ellen and Peter do not appear together. These characters appearing in the same opera is actually an invention of the librettist, okay? But basically, you know, she's there, and this is what's going down. Grimes is at his exercise. Da 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 dum is the same theme, the Leviathan theme, that is now sung by the Borough. Grimes is at his exercise. Yeah, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. He's got the boy, and we all know what's going on. Okay? So these insinuations, the Leviathan theme now moves, if you like, from Peter into the mouths of the Borough. And there's this diabolical. See, here's a really interesting thing. If you read through Britain's scholarship, if I can boast for a moment, I think this might have been one of my revelations in the chapter that I did for a lot of people. It's always said, oh, this is an opera about the conflict of the individual against society, you know, Grimes against the Borough. But I differ with that. If you look at Peter's music and the Borough's music and the keys, especially when Peter moves into B flat, which is the Borough's area, the flat, hell-like key relationship, they actually have a relationship with each other. And in fact, the victim in the opera is an orphan. She's the one who is actually rejected by both the Borough and Peter. And because this is a reversal of the Beethoven idea, the idea of the redemption opera or the rescue opera, where the woman goes to save her man, Fidelio, the Beethoven opera, where Leonora goes in to rescue her man and pull him out of prison. Well, in this opera, the woman goes in to save her man, but she doesn't get him. It's a subversion of a whole operatic tradition that comes up from Beethoven through the 19th century. Then we shall be there with him. After Peter has his breakdown, and after Ellen and Balstrode discover the little jersey that she knitted for the boy on the ocean front. You know, some of these images we're seeing of the refugees coming over from Europe, with the little boys drowned lying on the shore in the news. It's just chilling to see those things. And Ellen discovers this sweater that she knitted for him when he was a child, with an anchor on the chest. And now the thing that she gave him that was a gift has now become evidence of what has happened. Okay, and they sing together, "We shall be there with him." And then, of course, the great moment of all is the moment in Act 3 where the borough go out to get Peter. They go out to hunt him down. Okay, and this is where, if I can find it here in the libretto, this is where basically the borough go out to get him, to capture him. And Mrs. Sedley, of course, this kind of comical old English character, like a Victorian, like a Miss Marple or an Agatha Christie. Crime, it's my hobby is. She's always insinuating murder. Crime, it's my hobby is. All of her music is very chromatic. So she ties into that whole slithery chromatic thing. And then, of course, once she's got the borough worked up to go and get Peter, the chorus sing, "Who holds himself apart, lets his pride rise. Him who despises us will destroy, and cruelty becomes his enterprise. Him who despises us, we will destroy." And then some of the characters sing, "Our curse shall fall upon his evil day. We shall tame his arrogance. We will make the murderer pay for his crime." And then in a just breathtaking moment, and if you go to see this production, try and sit as near the front as you possibly can so you can get the full force of this. The chorus comes to the front of the stage and they sing, "Peter grinds." It's a really famous moment where everything just is like, whoa! And that is the Leviathan thing, broken into two halves in the mouths of the community. Right at the point they're going to get him. I have to play you this. I think we have time to do this. I have to play you this because it's just stupendous, this section of the music. It's frightening, it's horrible, but like a lot of horror and thrillers, it's kind of fascinating. Hear the chromaticism in the orchestra. It's the sing coming in. Who holds himself apart, destroy. The malevolent sing. Cruelty becomes his enterprise. Cruelty. Cruelty becomes his enterprise. All the time, the chromatic sing. Our curse will fall upon his evil day. The chorus again, like a wave. Is the cosmic ocean moving through the stage? Is it a cult? And then it builds up. Him who despises us will destroy. And then gradually it consolidates, it congeals. And then it freaks out. And then the pop song, the little dance on the clarinets, becomes this. And then the wind, chromatically, Leviathan. E&F. E&F. In the fish. It's the great climax at the end of Act 3. It's powerful, isn't it? Right? It's really, you feel it. If you sit near the front, don't forget Sadler's Wells that it was designed for as a small opera house. So Britain wanted people, in effect, Britain wanted people to feel what he was really feeling. That's really the truth. It wasn't a musical experience he wanted them to feel, he actually wanted them to feel the actual emotions that you felt. Okay? Now, of course, Peter Grimes is Peter Pears. This is his lover that's being hunted. Okay? And so we find this, and I'm looking at the clock, we've got about 5 minutes. So now we find this other very, very interesting relationship in the opera. And I don't have time, unfortunately, to play you all of Ellen's music. But if you look again at your handout just for a moment, can you see that there's a number of themes? I played you the Leviathan theme with the triplets. You remember? Ba, 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 where the fish comes up and smacks back down. Well, in the Storm Interlude, and notice in very, very small print there, I put A major for the Dawn Interlude. The first one is in A, which is a sunny, it's dawn. The sun is coming up, it's in A major, 3 sharps, okay? However, the Storm is E flat minor. Every note is flattened, except one. It's all the black notes on the piano, okay? The music has gone from, in a sense, white music, not quite, because there are 3 sharps, but if you will, to black music. And again, this is the devil's interval, A to E flat is the devil's interval. You'll hear this in the opera because Hi, lend us a hand. You'll hear Peter sing that off stage, bam, the orchestra will go. Hi, give us a hand, that's the E flat. And it'll register, you'll hear it. You'll notice a shock in the harmonic change, which is the movement from A into the devil's tritone, which is the A flat. And in this Storm Interlude, I'll just play the opening of it. What I want you to hear is, I want you to hear in particular the first episode. Look, here's the Storm Interlude, which is in E flat minor, very, very chromatic, very dark. Ready? This is the storm inside Peter, and like it looked like we were going to get this afternoon out here. Big dark clouds there. What we're hearing is psychopathic insect. It's a psychopath. What they sound like. Listen to this. This is the first episode. Which is the same triplets that we heard in that first interlude as Peter came up. Do you remember? So psychologically, what Peter is doing here is he's rejecting Ellen. There's a scene in the there's a moment in the first scene of Act 1 where the borough are ganging up on Peter and Ellen comes out. It's as they're getting ready to go and pick up the boy from the workplace to bring him in. And Ellen stops everybody and she basically sings John 8 from the New Testament. Let those amongst you without fault cast the first stone. Let the Pharisees and Sadducees. And so basically she positions herself as Christ. She's using the words of Christ. The borough become the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And ironically, Peter becomes the woman caught in the act of adultery, if you follow that logic through. right? That's not anywhere in the operatic, it's not in the scene, but if you actually follow the implications through, that's what it actually is. And in that moment of D major with F, Ellen really establishes herself as a radiance. She really proves to the borough there is this unconditional love, just like Christ had this unconditional love for the woman caught in the act of adultery. I have unconditional love for this man, and we are going to get this boy, and together through our love, we are going to look after this boy, we're going to raise him and protect him, and we will get married. So of course, this unconditional love terrifies Peter. Why is that? Why are we so afraid of unconditional love? What's the most beautiful thing you could think of? What's the most beautiful thing? Think about it for a moment. What's the most beautiful and amazing thing a human being could ever think? How about this? I know you're going to think it's a cliche. What if God, the creator of things, came down to earth and showed how much he loved us by dying for us, so that when we die, we can go to heaven for free? Can anybody think of a better thought? On Facebook, you've got the rest of your lives. You won't come up with one, I doubt. I mean, even if you say it's fiction, you've got to agree. There's no greater thought. But why didn't we say no? Why do we do that? It's in all of us. It's in human nature. And this is one of the reasons I think why Grimes in all of the operas that Britain does, this is one of the ones where when we sit there watching it, it speaks to us because it speaks to that rebellion, that pride that Peter represents, right? That pride that just will not accept the unconditional love. I must prove myself. I must catch fish. These borough gossips listen to money. I'll go and fish the sea dry. I have these fiery visions. You see, he's relying on himself. He's relying on his talent, his ego, his pride. And then saying, even the borough judge, who's as cropped as all get out, says, why don't you just marry her? She'll take you now. Just marry her. Don't worry about making enough money. This woman's going to love you. He can't take it. He can't accept it. So in that interlude, ba-da-da-dam, ba-da-da, is him strangling her. Sorry to be vivid, but it's like he's strangling her in music. Her theme is being crushed into these short, semitonal shapes, until the Sunday morning theme, which opens up Act 2. Glitter of waves and glitter of sunlight, bid us rejoice and lift our hearts on high. Man alone has a soul to save, and so goes to church on a Sunday. So she identifies herself, but she's not in the church. This is a very interesting thing. The borough go to church, but they're hypocrites. Church is not real. It seems real, it sounds real, but it's not real. It's basically a sanctification of what they really want to do, which is bitch, hate, jab, all the things a certain politician understands most people have. And if you lean on it and repeat it, you can count on the fish coming in. So much so, I will just say what I like. And you think it's outrageous, you watch the fish come in. I'll throw the chum out. Come on, Great America. It's as old as the hill. Come on, Great Germany. 1930s. Don't forget, 1945 this was written. What's the connection between Peter and Hitler? The Übermensch. The Führer. The embodiment. Interesting questions, aren't they? Right? And Ellen is his only hope. But as you can see from the outline here, towards the end of the opera, she's rejected, and in effect she becomes a kind of a dream person. So just to wrap up, because we are out of time, we've got a little bit over, and I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, if you're not in shock. Let me just read this thing out, which summarizes hopefully whatever I've left out. The music in the opera is located in the relationship between the mother, Britain's mother, Ellen, who is outside the opera as a kind of narrative voice looking down from heaven, his dead mum, who he let down by being gay. And Peter, her son, who is Peter Piers, Britain's lover, everybody said Peter Piers' voice was almost identical to Britain's mother's. Piers was actually a natural baritone, but constantly Britain wrote these high tenor parts, and constantly Piers had to go for singing lessons to be able to get up to these high parts because Britain had this performing relationship with his mum. And after she died, Piers became kind of this surrogate, okay? So let me just read that last bit again. And Peter, her son, who is Peter Piers, Britain's lover. Thus, there is a kind of erotic triangle between Britain, Piers, and his mother, in which boys represent Britain's soul in the period of his youth, identified with innocent Christianity. In this way, Peter, i.e. Britain and Piers, Peter Grimes, betrays his soul before his mother and the church in Act 2, Scene 1. His soul subsequently dying in a death that is spiritual suicide, and literally a baptism. He drowns himself at the end of the opera. An infernal baptism which Peter enacts at the opera's end. Thank you very much. Or hit me. Any questions?
I'll bring the mic over. Oh.
Thank you for a stimulating talk, but I wanted to ask you about the comic scene. What do you make of the two nieces and Swallow, who do the equivalent of an English music hall routine? You mentioned the pop song.
Right.
But I think that's a wonderful scene, and I think our audience should know there is some light relief in there.
Yeah, there is. There's definitely some comic relief. In fact, the very opening of the opera will remind you of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. But then very quickly it scales that turn to the minor key. Da, 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 da. And those scales are taking us down. Peter Grimes, Peter Grimes. We get a little bit of burlesque at the beginning. But then the point that you're making is that within the borough there's an auntie who runs the pub and her nieces who are whores. They're prostitutes. And everybody goes to see them, not least the leaders of the borough. Okay. Is this unique? No. Of course not. So, of course, the point that Britain's making here, of course, is that there are certain sins that are acceptable. So long as you play the game, those sins are okay. It's a question of shibboleths. Let us find a shibboleth. Which toilet are you going to go to? Right? You know what I'm saying? Where are you going to draw the line? I'll talk about Caroline and the whole issue of the toilet thing with the transsexuals. Yeah. And so Britain portrays them with supreme irony. There are comic moments, but they're bittersweet because they're all laced with hypocrisy and all laced with. But there are some very, very deft sketches that he makes of the different people in the bar. Even Swallow himself, typically sort of pompous, shouldn't be a leaver at all. But just because he's pompous and he's got that class status, he's able to do that. So you're absolutely right, there is. And even in the dance scene at the end of the opera, that I mentioned earlier, there's a sequence of dances. We don't see the dancing in most productions, it's off stage. But we hear it. So there's light music, but once again, as I showed you, that light music can become very dangerous very quickly in the right set of circumstances. Does that answer your question?
Simple question.
Just wait for the mic, please.
Who is Peter Piers? You keep referring to it.
Who is Peter Piers?
Yeah.
Peter Piers was a singer. Britain met him in the 1930s. They became good friends. It's a sophisticated. I recommend Humphrey Carpenter's biography. Humphrey Carpenter, the gentleman I mentioned earlier that I met in the pub in Oxford. It goes into a lot of detail about that. Piers was actually, interestingly enough, 5 years older than Britain. So Britain, who was attracted to much younger men, had an older lover, which is itself kind of interesting. And Piers was unfaithful to him quite quickly, actually. That was a source of pain for Britain. Britain was actually faithful to Piers. Apparently had no sex at all, actually. According to all the records, all the knowledge that we have. So Piers was this middle class. He comes from a family of naval officers, vicars, a very plummy middle class, handsome looking fella, who was a baritone singer. But as I said before, they had this performing relationship. Britain would play the piano, Piers would sing and recite. But it was this particular quality. Some people don't like it, some people do. There's a very strange sonority to Peter Piers' voice. It's kind of feminine, childlike, and a little unnatural. Which, of course, if you know he's a natural baritone, of course it is. And almost all of the major roles in Britain's operas throughout his life were written for him. Does that answer it for you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There were a couple of sections that reminded me
very much of, there's the fight scene in West Side Story.
Oh, yeah.
And one of those sounded so much like the fight scene in West Side
Oh,
Story.
yeah.
And then there was another scene, you played a section which was very, very powerful, which reminded me of, I think it's Maria's sister, who sings to her, this is after her lover is killed in the fight, and she starts singing, what kind of man can do this? And the music I heard just now sounded very much like that also.
Right. Bernstein and Britten met while they were here. Britten didn't like Bertie, he thought he was too arrogant and too mouthy. At one point, I think he punched Bernstein in the chest in a taxi just to get him to stop talking. But Bernstein gave the first American performance of Peter Grimes at Tanglewood, and never admitted it, but loved it. And in the same way that Peter Grimes was influenced by Porgy and Bess, West Side Story was directly influenced by Peter Grimes, not the least in the use of the devil's interval, the tritone. Maria is a tritone, for example. Okay? And so there's a symbiosis there, a bit like the Beatles and the Beach Boys. There's this give and take between Britain and the very last concert Bernstein conducted before he died with the Boston Symphony Orchestra was the 4C interlude from Peter Grimes. Which incidentally I recommend if you get a chance to listen to, if you can't hear the whole opera before you come to the production, try and see if you can track down the 4C interludes, especially if you've got the Passacaglia too, because that will be 5 of the 6 interludes, and that will introduce you to a lot of the music of the opera, so the music won't be strange to you. Do you know what I'm saying? You can cut to the chase a little bit more easily because it'll be more familiar. But you're absolutely right. There was definitely a symbiotic relationship between those two works, without doubt. Well done.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm actually the director of the production that's happening right now. No, I didn't do it for that reason, but he brought up the fact that what was going on in the world, the post-war, and so we are actually setting this in about 1945, 48, just post-war. These men have been off to war. The women have taken care of. So it brings it more current. So written, staged in the time that it was written, because I think it really speaks to that evil in the world that everybody gathering together, right or wrong, because Peter is an outlier, and you can say it's right or wrong against Peter, but there is this. So we chose to do that. So I just want
Yeah.
So if you come, don't be surprised, because we're not doing it in the period that it was set. We're doing it in the period that it was written.
There's a quotation in Billy Budd, it's Claggett, the evil character, and he sings this line, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehends it and suffers." That's the key to Britain's work. That's the key to Britain's work. He rejected, if you will, the truth, but he didn't reject it. He knew it was there. He believed it all right, but he knew he was outside of it. And he welcomed it always into his work, like a piece of grit in a pearl, in a oyster, right? Like a piece of grit in an oyster. The Christian theme, you'll think, having done what he did with Piers, he'd be right out of it, like Michael Tippett, his contemporary, who never bothered with Christianity, or just totally secular operas. Exactly. But Britain didn't do that. He kept welcoming Christianity back. Why? Because he needed the pain of recognizing, I'm going to hell. I paid the price. Everybody thinks my music's wonderful except me. It's sloppy seconds. Being a great classical composer is absolutely sloppy seconds compared to the price I paid for it, which is my eternal life. But I'm going to pay it. And therein lies this weird Faustian pact with the artist. What is that? It's weird, isn't it? It's strange. Most of the people who write classical music fit into this Faustian. It's the reason why the Faustian theme is so strong. And the funny thing is, in Peter Grimes, you really feel it. And I think coming out of the Second World War, exactly as you say, it's appropriate, right? Because it just captures that whole essence, not only of total war in Nazi Germany, but total war within oneself and total war with one's neighbour, which is really what I think Peter Grimes sort of addresses, really. Yeah, it's profound stuff. Don't like it. Admire it, and in a sense need to hear it, because it's a point of view I don't share, and I need to know, wow, that exists. That's good to know. I'm interested in humans because I am one, but I don't necessarily agree with it. But I do love the orchestration. I can admire the artistry that's there. But we always get this feeling with Britain that it's like this, with his music. It's a beauty, but you always get the sense that his hand's out. Like, don't come too close and don't follow. I'm showing you the road not to travel, in a sense. And yet he needed that to produce the genius. That's the weird thing about it. He needed that, all of those negatives, to create the genius. This is why he suffered with depression most of his life. Chronic depression for most of his life. It was because he was repressing and dealing with all these really strange themes. I think it was one of his relatives on a film called A Time There Was. One of his relatives, a very quaint-looking influence, he says, don't you think that there are some people that, on our behalf, plunge into the occult and come back to tell us? I thought, what a strange thing for a relative to say, right? But she said it. And I thought, wow, there's something going on here. This is why I think why Britain's music keeps coming around, and we have to re-encounter it again, and re-explore it, and allow it to challenge us in our thinking. In that sense, it is positive and constructive.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
How did you get interested in Britain?
Well, I was actually a great fan of Michael Tippett's music. I didn't particularly care for Britain, actually. I had a friend at college who was really into Britain, and we used to have this joke, we put on Britain, I put on Tippett. And when I came to do my PhD, somebody said, do your PhD on a subject you don't love. That was good advice, because they said you'll hate it by the end. Do it on something you respect. I thought, well, can't go wrong with Britain. I mean, he's an absolute master, next to Mozart and maybe Shostakovich. I mean, some of the most natural music that you could ever care to hear comes from those people. And so I thought, well, I'll learn a lot from Britain. I didn't know so much about this stuff then. I was more interested in other aspects of spirituality and or whether music can change a person spiritually. I believe it can, but maybe in a more limited way. But these other darker things became apparent to me after my master's, and once I started branching out into the operas as a whole, and especially when Humphrey Carpenter's biography came out. I recommend you won't be able to put that down. It's a great read. 1992 Humphrey Carpenter, biography on Britain. It's a brain bender, and it was a real game changer when it came out.
Okay, maybe we exhausted
Enough?
you. Thank you